are. And the picture that I gave, as you can
Interesting.
see, is shows a waterway. And my, if not argument, my notion, because I'm going with what you guys said about wanting to strike out into areas that you hadn't been in order
Mm-hmm.
to get back to the river, but at an upriver point, at a different point from where
Yes.
you left, and so that way you will encounter neither the jackal tribe nor will you go back toward the ant tribe.
Was
So
everybody okay with it? I mean, that was something that that Isasha suggested, but
my impression was that it got enough sort of yes, that sounds okay noises to justify. I had to go with something.
Yeah, yeah, I
And
think
Yeah,
so.
but
you
I think where we left at, I had my sand, and we
right.
decided we were following. Yeah, we,
Now the other interesting point about that, especially, is to tell you a little bit about the role that Sam made for Vefselk's orienteering
mm-hmm.
through
Yeah,
astronomy.
Yeah.
yes.
Now, what I did was I had already written different ways that you could go from that pile of rocks and what was in each direction. And so, therefore, when it said that I roll, and if you fail or if the roll fails, then I go and I do a randomized roll on, in what direction. Which I suppose
Right.
in an ordinary map I would roll a D8 or something for the compass
Mhm.
points,
mm,
Yeah.
intermediates. But in this case, I had those little directions already, you know, designated of ways to go, and so therefore I just randomized those and rolled another die to see which way, and it landed on the right direction.
Okay.
So so you ended up sort of guessing or being mistaken that you were certain, but you did actually
Right.
go. So that means that when you guys said at the end, more or less said, this is where we're going, then my signal as, new session maker, new scene framer, is to actually put you where you wanted to go. Because if that had landed in any other way on that particular roll early in the session, that's not the map I would be providing you with right now. So,
I'm going to write it down to Webshell being very good at this astronomy.
oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
There you go.
it's just
I'm
my
going to be
knowledge of the
really
she's
stars.
impressive.
great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
Oh my
Impressed.
god.
so as it turns out, the trip, the journey that you all make is relative. I would say is pretty uneventful for some days travel. There's nothing to suggest otherwise. There's no system in the book to check for travel encounters, at least as far as I could find. So therefore, you come, to a place where waters are coming out of high places and joining the big river. So this isn't the great big river. You are still kind of in the highlands, relatively speaking. Um, but it's lower altitude than you were before. It's flatter. The waters in particular kind of wiggle. It's the kind of landscape where the earth is soft, and so you end up with the waterways carving different paths. Every time it floods. So in this case, it's pretty. Uh, it's the water is running. It's not all dried up with just a little trickle there. Now, however, it's going to take you a little while to get to the depicted spot. So I'm going to start you a little bit upstream from there. And so uh, the first thing to do is to describe the environment a little bit more. We're no longer in these kind of these really arty striped rock and fossilized skeleton environments that you've been in so far. Instead, you've come to areas where it's more like, instead of sand and rock, it's dirt. It's very rocky dirt. It's got gravel and stuff. It's the land. The plants are still tough, low plants with really really tough bark and lots of thorns. But you're now seeing fields of cactus. You're now seeing a hillside covered with these plants. Wherever you look, there's some vegetation. Um, it's then there are stretches which are bare rock, but they are just sections. They're just areas. They aren't whole landscapes. Does that clarify a little bit the kind of
Yeah.
situation? Now,
Yeah.
interestingly, from Vevselk's point of view, these actually aren't such great hunting grounds for a couple of reasons. One is that the herd animals are more abundant and more organized in their defense. So, going after a trio of wild pigs is one thing. Going after 30 wild pigs is another. They have a tendency to say, "Oh, there's more of us than you." And so, and then there's the other problem, which is with a little bit more abundant game and variety, a slightly more variety of creatures. It's not an immense, but somewhat more. Therefore, larger and larger predators will be interested in the area. So this isn't really, you're not in a true forest. There's no groves of trees, for example. But this is the interestingly enough, I mean, it's where a band of hunters might go, but not where a single or a pair of hunters would go. There's just too much chance of, too much chance of making a kill and having a pack of hyenas show up and decide it's theirs.
Okay, so I was wondering, is there any particular type of predator we have to be careful for, or I mean, what we can assume about the fauna here? It's I'm probably asking Vepshel in this case because she probably knows.
I was going to say it's not really Farth's thing.
Yeah,
And this strikes me. One of the reasons that I've been just basically data dropping on you is that this is clearly not roll worthy. This is I'm not going to have you roll for your hunters, your landscape knowledge, just to have knowledge of the basic ecology that you've lived in all your life. So the primary issue is to not to know really what they are so much as to know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain things to concern yourself with. I'm going to simply list them straight from the book rather than knowing that these are here specifically. These are the things that the book says are desert creatures.
Okay.
There are some gaudy monsters, but I'm not really talking about those right now. One of probably the biggest danger are called scrix, which are people-sized insects, more or less like praying mantises, who are somewhat technological, although they kind of don't have to be. They've got natural weaponry and very hive oriented, have sort of stereotypical insect hive, even though mantises don't. But anyway, and they they're big on capturing large mammals and paralyzing them and dragging them off, to feed the larvae. So that's one thing. And they live all over the place. And there's a desert variety. It happens to be white in color. Then there's also sand cats, which are really not a danger to people.
Okay.
They're basically kitty cats that live out there in sort of colony groupings and hunt solitary. And there are some creatures which are sort of dubiously here or not. It says mountains in their habitat. We might as well toss in a couple. The giant lynx, which is enormous. I mean, like stands next to sit down, and the person is at head height with it. Lynx. That there's a whole thing about how they like elves and rangers and stuff and become their companions, and you can kind of see where this is going. But personally, I kind of like the idea when they don't. A creature like that would easily see a human as perfectly viable. That's oh, look, a slow deer. I can catch that one. And so there are those, and there are giant ants, which is the namesake of one tribe, and they are the namesake of a tribe because they're a considerable presence. I mean, they can, they make enormous mounded colonies. They operate in an organized fashion. They are, kind of scary, really. So there are those, and what else come to mind? There's some of the other, very rattlesnakes and so forth. Although that would be North American, but never mind. There are rattlesnakes because it's a desert, and that's how it is. And what else? Yes, actually, this is kind of a big deal. So Vevselk and Ithasha are both familiar with an important creature. They are called sand spikes, and they are usually found. They breed, or at least make colonies near water. So it's actually kind of a good thing to run into sand spikes because if you're running out of water or worried about water, you can. In fact, I'm kind of tempted to see how you guys handle your water as you traveled this way, but maybe not. So you've managed to get to an area which is still pretty sandy, and any time that you guys are coming to big deposits of sand and water is nearby, it's probably a good idea to keep an eye out for the sand spikes. And so you guys know, the two female characters know this simply by this being part of their environment. Will anybody tell Farth to keep an eye out for the sand spikes?
I would mention to it. Yeah, I would mention it to him. Certainly.
So the problem is that they put their little pointy noses up just out of the sand. And if you step on them, they inject venom into you.
Ouch.
Yeah. And while one isn't really enough to do anything but annoy a human, since there's a bunch of them, if you fall on them or if you start doing the avoidance dance because you stepped on one, you're probably going to step on a bunch of others. And so that's how strangers get killed, is panicking when encountering sand spikes. Okay. And the big ones are actually a delicacy. You can actually gather them up in a bag like oysters and take them places, and people will pay good money for them.
Okay.
So those anyway. So the reason I'm saying this is everybody please make an observation roll regarding sand spikes.